from onlinechesslessons.net, and today I'm going to be presenting a game from the exhibition match between Viswanathan Anand and Alexei Shirov, and the match is taking place in Ciudad de Leon in España, in Spain, and it's the 24th Masters Tournament of 2011. So Anand played d4 and Shirov answered with d5. So with c6, and now we're going into a Slav structure. And so both sides are fighting for control of the center, the center of four squares. And pretty much black is trying to set up a stronghold on the light squares in the center. And so white might get a slightly, slight space advantage in these types of structures, but black usually has a very solid position. So with the move h6, black is putting the question to white's bishop. Does he want to take the knight or move back to h4? So bishop to h4 seems to be, this is just theory. I mean, this theory has been around for decades. So now with d takes c4, black is ready to enter a very complicated variation of the queen's gambit accepted. So inviting e4. So after g5, so black is pushing back the bishop to g3 to avoid any kind of complicated mess that arises after b5 and e5 and now g5. This is incredibly complicated. So Shirov is just taking it into a different line. So he plays g5 first to prevent that, and after bishop g3, now b5. So what's going on here? Well, black has he's weakened his position significantly to pursue a pawn. So he's won a pawn, but he's also had to play g5 and b5, which are extreme weaknesses. You can never take pawn moves back. On the flip side, white sacrificed a pawn, but he's got a great center. He's controlling a lot of squares in the centers, very dynamic pawn mass in the center, and ready to roll. And he's also got a lead in development. So, it's a balanced game. It's dynamic, short-term advantages of, being able to push forward in the center and a leading development versus the static material advantage of a pawn. So now with bishop e2, white is just calmly developing, and bishop b7, and now queen c2. So queen c2 is just going to support the e4 pawn, and there's also some ideas of the queen invading along this diagonal, some potential sacrifices in the future. So both players here have played nearly immediately. This is just textbook stuff. It's been around for decades, like I said previously. And so after knight bd7 and rook d1. So in my database, looking at it, rook d1 has not been played so much. I believe typically you see knight to e5, h4 is an idea, and the most common move is castles. So rook d1 seems to be an aggressive sideline. And so in this position, black nearly always answers with bishop to b4. And the idea of bishop b4 seems to be very simple, to try to prevent white from playing the immediate d5, because that's just going to sacrifice another pawn, and black's just going to be too solid there. He's just going to be up two pawns. It's not going to work. So bishop b4 seems to be the main move. Some other ideas: the queen immediately to b6 with the idea of evacuating the king from the center. That seems to be okay. And also getting the queen out from the x-ray along the d-file. But the move chosen by Shirov seems to be a little dubious. It was not in the database, knight to h4. And so the reason it's dubious is pretty simple. He needs to develop some more pieces, and he needs to get his king out of the center. Most importantly, his king, because it's just going to open up the playing field. White is pretty much completed his development. He's got a lot of pieces aiming at the center and at black's king. Black is up a pawn, but the central break d5 really suggests itself. So the only white piece not in the game is the rook on h1, and that could come into the game with moves like h4. So knight to h5 seems pretty dubious. And now with d5, simply a very logical move. Just, okay, if black wants to mess around and move the same piece a couple times in the opening, then white's going to try to punish that by opening the center and really busting open black's position. Especially the rook on d1 is going to come to life here. And the pawn on e6, definite weakness. So I believe that Fritz had suggested bishop g7 in this position. And I mean, this stuff is super complicated. I had to rely on a computer to analyze some of it just because it's just too crazy. So after bishop g7, that appears to be the best move for black, and Fritz suggested d takes, f takes, and now the move e5. So the move e5 to open up this queen to g6, and well, it's just a mess. It seems like a roughly balanced position. I'd prefer to play white in a practical game because he's got all the attacking chances. So going back, Shirov played queen. Well, he first knight takes g3, pawn takes. So now the rook is opened up on the h file, and now queen to b6. So again, bishop g7 was the idea in that position to defend. So queen to b6, and I believe this is just a straight blunder. By using Fritz and just analyzing myself, I couldn't find a way for black to get back in the game after this move. So queen to b6, I guess Shirov is just trying to bounce. He's trying to just dip out of the center, but it just is not going to happen because his king is all by itself. It's got no friends to protect it. So it's going to start out with pawn takes e6, pawn takes e6, and now knight takes g5. So I don't really know what Shirov missed in the position, but after knight h5, he definitely found himself in a difficult position, and I guess he got frustrated, and queen b6 seems almost a little impulsive because the following variation is not that crazy. It's not that tough to see. So now bishop to c5, just trying to develop some pieces and maybe put some pressure on the white king. But after bishop e2 check, so putting some pressure on the light squares against black's queen, and also defending the pawn on f2, most importantly. So now after king e7, knight takes e6, not a terribly difficult shot to see, and the idea is that if king takes e6, then simply bishop g4, and the rook is going to, white's going to regain his piece and also have a very dangerous attack against black's king. No pawn cover, no pieces really defending it either. So after knight takes e6, Shirov is in some serious trouble here. I think the game's already over. So knight to e5 is going to try to take control of a couple squares around black's king, and also maybe the idea is also to come knight to d3, trying to limit white's rook on d1. So knight takes c5, queen takes c5, and so what's going on in the position? Well, black has 5 pawns here, and white has 6. So white's up a pawn, and black has no pawns or really any pieces around his king. It's just all being controlled by the white pieces, and in particular his white squares. Well, what does black have going for him? His queen is active. His queen's on a good square, and that's kind of about it. So he's in some serious trouble. So after rook a to f8, so now black does have some, well, he's starting check, a nice check, and you know, he's got some ideas to attack. So Anand simply castles here, and now rook hg8. So black is maybe getting some ideas of attacking, but it's going to be difficult because he doesn't have any time. So now b4, a nice move by Anand, just kicking the black queen. And so after queen takes b4, and now queen d2, and this was the idea, to set up a discover attack on the black queen on b4 with knight d5 check, which would win it, and also to simultaneously attack the h6 pawn, so bringing the queen a good bit closer to the black king. So now queen c5 and queen takes h6, and so now the queen is working with the rook on the d file, and there's all kinds of ideas just hanging in the air for white. So bishop to c8, I think that was the only move really to defend, just trying to take over some squares around the black king. So now queen to h4. Anand throws in a couple of checks here. I think he was just looking for the right, the finishing, forcing combination. Just trying to figure out exactly, the best way to do it. And so now he plays knight to d5, a temporary piece sacrifice that just is going to serve to blow the position up. So he's threatening knight to c7, for example. That's definitely a major threat, and so I think black's got to take it. And so now rook takes d5. So white had to sack a piece to bust through the pawn cover, but it looks like there's no way for black to get out of this. His king is just too lonely in the center, and his pieces he doesn't have any threats. So white can just do what he wants. So now white sacrifice the knight, and he's trying to get this bishop into the attack. Bishop g4. That's going to cut off a lot of squares on the black king. So queen to h5. He's trying to put some pressure. He's established a focal point with that knight on e5. And so queen b8. Fritz recommended knight to d7, I believe. But that just doesn't make sense. If you're trying to defend, that's you never want to make a move like that. So queen b8 makes sense. Trying to maintain that knight on e5 and also prevent the white bishop from coming to g4. So now rook to d1. So white has almost all of his pieces in the attack. And so now he's firmly controlling the d file. And maybe he's getting ready to play f4 and bring the bishop to g4. Well, after rook f6, Anand finished the game and in classic style, just forcing moves till the end. So Shirov about a minute and a half here. Anand almost 7 minutes. That's it's never good to be in time trouble when you're defending, although they are playing with a 30-second increment. So rook takes e5, queen takes, and simply bishop g4 checks. So if black's only got he doesn't really have any alternatives here. He's either going to have to play king to e7 is not going to work because he's going to drop his queen, or the move played in the game, he played rook takes g4 and queen to e8 was checkmate. So a fantastic game by Anand. Looks like Shirov didn't really have the theoretical preparation on this one with a couple dubious moves early on. So this is Will Stewart from OnlineChessLessons.net, and thanks for listening.